What's up, everybody? It's Travis here from Travis.media, and today we're going to be talking about the JAMstack. And not only talking about it, but building one. All right, so if you're into web development, coding, if you're self-taught or learning to code, you're into freelancing, anything like that, consider hitting that subscribe button below. Lots of great videos planned for 2020. All right, so I had a comment on a video asking me to explain the JAMstack. So I'm going to try to explain it here up front, and then we're going to actually build something to really understand the concept better. And by the way, there's a lot of documentation out there on the JAMstack. I'm not going to hit every point right here, but I'm going to try to do my best to give a broad overview. So I'm going to start off with a little example. So let's say we have Jane Doe here, and Jane Doe says, "Hey, Travis, I need a website. I have a blog and I have some products that I want to sell. Can you build it for me?" Well, out of habit, we're going to immediately think something with a database, something like WordPress. Because she has blog posts, she has products that she's got to sell. This has got to be stored in the database. We have authentication. We're probably going to have forms. We need a database. Now, that happens out of habit because that's the way we've done things for a long time. Well, the JAMstack challenges whether she really needs all that or not. See, her setup, and what we're used to with things like WordPress, is a monolithic setup. So the front end is tightly coupled with the back end. So somebody makes a request on the front end, it's sent back to the server, it goes to the database, it makes some queries, it produces some HTML and sends it back to the user. So they see the page and they're like, "Oh great, here's another blog post I want to read." They click the next blog post, sends that request, goes to the server, hits the database, queries all of that information, produces the HTML, sends it back to the user, on and on and on. And actually, if she just keeps clicking between that page and the previous and that page and the previous, it's going to keep making those requests. It's going to keep hitting the database. And at some point, like 4 or 5 years ago, maybe more than that, maybe less, I don't know, somebody questioned this. Hey, if she's requesting the exact same information each time, why do we have to keep querying it? Why do we have to keep doing this long, drawn-out process just to give her that same information again? It's a valid question. In fact, why does she even need a database? The JAMstack is not like a tool you have to learn. It's more of a concept, a philosophy kind of. And it stands for 3 things. It's an acronym, JAM, JavaScript, API, and markup. Let's start with markup. In the JAMstack, you have this templated markup that's pre-built. So in this monolithic setup, you got to make the request and it builds the query and produces it on every single request. In the JAMstack, things are pre-built. So people write blog posts or pages in something like markup, and they run this script and it builds out all of the pages statically into a folder, and then that folder can be put on a CDN. So everything is pre-built, the pages are static, they're put on a CDN. When somebody requests a page, they don't have to go through all of that stuff. They're just given, boom, here's your static page. I want this page, boom, here's your static page. It's the same page served every time. And the benefit of that is speed, security, there's no database. All it is a static page being served. And the neat thing is that it's pre-built. Now let's keep going. Let's jump over to the J, JavaScript. The JavaScript is basically the request response cycle on the client end. So that's either through a third party or querying some back-end database, something like Node or whatever. It can be whatever. But remember, it's pre-built. So if it's going to a database, it's going to query that database, build out these static pages, and then serve those static pages. So there's still no database involved. And the third one is API. We're in 2020. Everything is an API, and so, again, you can hit a third-party API from the client side, or you can hit an API in like a headless backend, so like a WordPress backend or a Node backend or something like that. You can query out some posts, some images, some other info, and again, this is pre-built. So when you do these queries, you pull that info, these pages are statically generated and then served to the CDN. So when somebody requests that page, it's going to keep serving the same data over and over and over really, really fast until you pre-build it and send up some updates. Then it's going to send them that new page over and over and over. Now, the final piece in this is Git. So essentially what a lot of people do, and you really have two options here, what a lot of people do is they push their code up to a Git repository. They have a folder that stores their pages and posts in Markdown. And then they have it hooked up to something like Netlify. So when they push up changes, it automatically kicks off a build, builds those static pages and puts it back up on the CDN and validates the cache, and people get the new page over and over again. The other option is, hey, well, I got lots of images or I have lots of static files. What do I do then? Well, like I said earlier, you can still have the backend CMS, or you can use something like Netlify CMS, whatever. You still have a backend, and you can still pull data from that backend, but that backend is decoupled from your static pages, because you're pulling that data in the build process and pushing up static pages to be served. So essentially, that's the JAMstack as I understand it. I'm sure there's other nuances and things that I might have missed, but hopefully that helps you understand it better. I think it's a wonderful thing that we're questioning the use of a database. Now we have all these cloud environments. We have things like Azure functions, Lambda functions. In this day and age, APIs are everything. All right, so hopefully that helped you understand everything. Let's jump into an example. We're going to build out a site with Hugo and use Netlify to push their static files too. Let's get started.
All right, so before we get started, I wanted to show this image real quick to better understand things visually. So we have our presentation layer here. This is going to be the view or front end of everything. And here's the static site generator category. This is what we discussed earlier. So here's Gatsby, here's Hugo, here's Next, these kind of static site generators. But we can also use just a plain JavaScript framework like Angular, React, or Vue on the front end. Now, if we move down to the API section, we have either a headless CMS or a third-party utility API that we can utilize. So with this headless CMS, you have things like Contentful, Butter CMS, Forestry, back-end CMSs that you can use to pull data from. But your app may not require that. You may be good with just utilizing third-party APIs. Like if you needed to sell products only, you could use something like Snipcart, which is a third-party service. And actually, I think you just put a couple of lines of JavaScript in your site and you can interact with it. But the rest of these, like Stripe, say you wanted a payment system, well, your money and your payment information is all managed within the Stripe management system, but you just use the API to process transactions, to post or get transactions, whatever you need to do. Same thing with something like Twilio. You use their API to send or receive SMS messages or text messages. And so with that, you can use something like React, because the JavaScript is just doing this request response cycle. So it can make a request to this API, pull back some data. Next, we have Git. So if you have blog posts or things that you can store, non-sensitive things that you can store in a Git repository, basically something like GitHub can be your database. We're going to see that in a minute. And finally, you have your hosting/CDN that's going to serve the static files to the end user, something like Netlify, which we're going to be using also. So hopefully that was helpful. Another image real quick, and disregard all this ghost backend. But here's a front end framework. Here's Gatsby, here's Hugo, and here's your API request. So you want some Instagram data, pull it in. You want Shopify or Stripe, just pull it in and post to it. Auth0. So these are third-party APIs you can use with something like React. But these APIs are built beforehand. So you make these API calls, you build these static files, and you deploy that to this hosting service, which is going to serve these static files to the end user. All right, so let's get started. Now, why did I pick Hugo? Well, Hugo is super popular, but it seems like everybody's using Gatsby nowadays. So I decided to go against the grain and just use Hugo for our static site generator. So I can just click on Quick Start to get started and basically follow the instructions to create this site. So step one is install Hugo. I've already done this. If you're on a Mac, it's just, and you have Homebrew, it's just brew install Hugo. If you're on Windows, just check out this link and install Hugo globally. Next, create a new site. So we just do this command, Hugo new site, and whatever you want to call your site. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to go to my desktop and create a new folder. And I'm going to drag that folder into VS Code and open it up in VS Code. So in VS Code, I'm going to open up the terminal. And I'm going to paste in that command. So Hugo new site, and I'm just going to call it something like example site. And there we have it. We have a new site. Click on this folder. You'll see we now have folders. We have themes, data, layouts, content, all of this good stuff. Let's keep scrolling. Now we need to add a theme. To add a theme, we need to cd into our directory, of course. We need to initialize Git because we're going to be using that in a minute. And then we're just going to pull down this repository and put it in our themes folder. Well, I don't like this theme much, so I'm going to pick a different one called Ghostwriter. And if you just go to Google and type in Hugo Ghostwriter theme, it'll come up. If I go to homepage, it should take us to the GitHub repo. I'm going to go to clone here and just copy this link. All right, and my command again is git submodule add, my GitHub link, and then theme / whatever we call the theme. So here I'm going to do, well, let me cd into my site folder, do a git init to initialize Git, then I'll do git submodule add, my Git repository link, and then themes / and this is called Ghostwriter. Now, if you come up here, you see this themes folder. The themes folder already exists, but the Ghostwriter doesn't. So this is going to copy that theme into a folder within themes called Ghostwriter. So I hit enter. Wait for that to clone. All right, so that's done. Let's see what's next. So step 3, add a theme. We did that. Then add the theme to the site configuration. So we're going to echo theme equals whatever theme name to this config.toml file. So if we come down here, we can find that file here. Instead of using the terminal to do that, I'm just going to say theme equals, I'm going to type it in myself. The theme is called Ghostwriter, I believe. Save it. Step 4, add some content. So you can add a new post by this Hugo new command. So Hugo new posts / my first post. This is going to copy it, and it says here, you can manually create content files and provide metadata in them. However, you can use the new command to do things like this. And there's more flags to this command. You can check it out. But I'm just going to run this exact command to create a new post. So I'm going to paste that in and hit enter. It says post created. So if we come up here to our content folder, we'll see in the posts folder, my first post.md. I'm going to grab some lorem ipsum really quick. I'm going to generate 3 paragraphs of it and copy it. Go back to my blog post and just paste that in. Now I'm going to create 2 more posts, so I'm just going to hit up, change it from first post to second post, create another one, and change second to third. I'm going to go in second post, paste in the lorem ipsum, and the same thing with the third post. Now, in order for these to deploy, I think they need to be not in the draft status. They need to be published. So if I go draft false, I'm going to need to do this to all 3. So go and change your draft to false. I'm not 100% on this, but I'm almost sure that's the case. So we want these to be published status. All right, next, edit the newly created content if you want. We already did that. And start the Hugo server. And just a side note, like if you wanted a navigation, you could just go to Google, type in Hugo navigation. And there's some great, Hugo has great documentation. Here it is, menus. And if I scroll down, I can just copy this, find my config file, and just paste it down here. So menu, it creates 2 new items. One called About Hugo, and its URL is /about. Another one called Getting Started, and its / is Getting Started. And you can add some pre and post HTML. It's kind of neat. So if I save that, now we should have a menu. So the next step was to run the server, which is Hugo server /d or -d. So come down here and do Hugo server -d. And web server is available at this address. So if we go to that address, here is our new site. Looks great. Here's my first post, second post, third post. And here's our lorem ipsum. And here's our menu items. About Hugo, of course, we didn't make an about page. You'd have to add that. I don't want to get into that in this video. If you want me to do a video also of building out a Hugo site, I'm happy to do that. I'll show you how to create the pages and the templates and all that stuff. Just let me know. But for now, this is our static site. So how do we generate the static files? Because if you look, we haven't done that yet. Well, let's kill the server. Instead of type in Hugo server, just type in the word Hugo And what will happen is these static files will build in a folder called public. Sometimes you see the folder called dist, D-I-S-T, but it's going to be with Hugo, it's going to be in a public folder. So type in Hugo, hit return. Boom. Now you have this public folder with your static files. So if you go to posts, you have an index.html for my first post, another index for my second post. So these are no longer markdown. These are HTML files. They're served statically. All right, here's the main index.html file. You'll see everything kind of built out into this static file. Pretty cool. All right, so we have our static site, and it's generating fine. The next step is we need somewhere to store these blog posts and pages and static files. We're not using a database, so we're actually just going to use GitHub. This is a common practice. Use GitHub as your quote-unquote database. And it's pretty neat because you can create these blog posts, and then if people are like, hey, you misspelled this, they can actually go in and fix it and then create a pull request for you to pull in that change. Or if somebody's like, hey, you should talk about this, you can say, why don't you add it to my post? It's on GitHub, fork it, make the change, and then send me a pull request, and I'll approve it or not. So we need to push this up to GitHub. So go to your GitHub page and create a new repository. I'm going to call it Hugo Example and create repository. Now, before we commit these files and push everything up to our repo, there's one thing I need to talk about. So when we ran this command to build these static files, it created this public folder. Well, we don't want to push this public folder up to our repo because that's going to be generated on every build. So we don't want that to be in our repository because it's going to be different every time we build our site. So good practice is to just add that to the gitignore file, which doesn't exist yet. So let's come up here, create a new file, and call it gitignore. And in that file, we're just going to put /public/. And what that's going to do is that's going to ignore this whole folder when we push it up to GitHub. Again, we want that to generate every time we build, so we don't want that stored there. And you'll understand that more in a minute. So now I can go here to my Git icon, and I can stage all of these changes, and I can commit it with a message of initial commit. Now I can come back over here and grab my remote URL because we need to add this remote to our local repo. Let me clear this out. I'm going to come over here and paste that and add that remote. And now I can do a git push u origin master. Let's send these files up. All right, so this pushed up to our repo. So if we come back and refresh, we should have these files in our repository. Awesome. So how do we actually build this and serve it to the end user? Well, that's where Netlify comes in. So if you go to netlify.com and sign up for an account, it's free, don't worry. So I'm going to go to login. And I think it remembers my login. But anyway, you'll have to create a new account, which again is free, and you'll end up at this app.netlify.com webpage. And if it's your first time, it'll actually ask you to authenticate with GitHub, and then it'll add Netlify as an application to your GitHub profile. So you'll need to authenticate there, and then you'll end up at this screen. And then you want to click New Site from Git, and it's going to be continuous deployment. So click GitHub, and then I'm already authorized. You'll probably be already authorized if you go ahead and set that up. So I'm going to say Hugo Example because that's a repository I want to. Okay. All right. No repositories found. Hugo Example. All right. So let me click here. Configure Netlify on GitHub. So I need to give it access here. You may not have to go through all this, but I think we called it example. Hugo Example. Yeah, Hugo Example. So if you come to this screen, you can select all repositories and then you can choose from it. I just want select repositories. So I'm going to choose this Hugo Example repository that we just pushed up and save it. So that's what happened. I had select repos chosen, not all of them. So I had to go and say, hey, use this repository. So here it is, Hugo Example. So once you get that, click that, and you're going to get to step 3, which is build options and deploy. The owner, I think they did this automatically. I didn't choose this. Branch to deploy is going to be master. In the basic build settings, so the build command is going to be Hugo. Remember, we did the Hugo command to build that static folder. So the build command is Hugo, and the published directory is going to be public. Remember, the public folder is what was built. So basically what this does is when you're working on your site and you make some changes and then you push it to GitHub, to the master branch, it kicks off a build in Netlify. And that build command is Hugo, which builds that static folder. And the published directory is public because that's where it builds at. And then essentially those are your static files. Those are the files that are going to be served to your end user. So if I click deploy site, this will take a couple of minutes to deploy. But once it's done, I'll show you the site. So now it says your site is deployed. Then you can set up a custom domain and secure your site with HTTPS. Pretty straightforward. But right now, they created this temporary URL that we can click on and view our site. All right, so the site looks terrible. Something happened. Let's look at the developer tools, and we'll see that we have mixed content. The page at this new URL was loaded over HTTPS but requested an insecure style sheet, example.org. So that's not our site at all. This request has been blocked. The content must be served over HTTPS. So there's two issues here. Number one, we have mixed content. Number two, and an even bigger issue, is that we're pointing to an example.org here for these style sheets and scripts. That's no good. So let's go back to our Hugo site. And let's type in example.org, and we see that the base URL is example.org. So now that we have this site, let's put the base URL here. Let's put the base URL there with the HTTPS. Let's save it. And I'm kind of glad this happened because now we can push our new changes and see a build happen in Netlify. So here's our one change in this config file. Let's go ahead and stage it and say updated mixed content and base URL. And let's git push to push it to our repository. Now, when this pushes there, Netlify should detect that change on the master branch and kick off another build, which should fix our site. So git push. Once this is done, let's go to Netlify and see if we have a new deployment going on. Yep. Automatically kicked off a new deployment. Now it says building. And let's see what happens. All right, so that deployment is finished. It says published. So now let's see if we have a better looking site. And there we have it. Our insecure content should be fixed. We should have no errors, and there are no errors. Here's our new site. So here on Netlify, we're at this temporary URL. We've created our static site. We've pushed it up to GitHub. And every time we make a change, it's going to kick off a new build, where Netlify is going to run this Hugo build command and build a new static folder full of static files to serve our end user. And that's about the most simple and basic example of a JAMstack, and I think it's really, really neat. There's more we could talk about here, but I want to leave it there. I think we've already gone pretty long, but hopefully that was helpful. And again, if you want to see some examples with like a headless CMS or with Gatsby or something like that, please let me know and I'll do a follow-up video with those. But for now, if you enjoyed this kind of thing, consider hitting that subscribe button, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next video.